Hi Fit Life, it's Terry again. So today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to focus on some squash, different types of squash. Now our summer vegetables are about over with, so now we have our fall vegetables coming in. And today we're going to work with some spaghetti squash, a butternut squash, and an acorn squash. Now, I'm sure you probably passed those by in the grocery store not knowing how to cook them or what to do with them. So today we're going to solve that problem. And I'm going to give you some key tips on how to fix these and what you can do with them. All right, so first of all, we're going to take our acorn squash. Now, you want to make sure that it doesn't have any blemishes or bruises and it looks nice and firm here, which this one does. And these are really hard to peel, or just even slice. I have a hard time slicing them. So what I like to do is just kind of like take a fork and just kind of poke them occasionally, because we're gonna let some of that steam out. And in order for me to slice it better, I'm gonna throw this thing in the microwave for about 6-8 minutes until it's a little bit tender, and that's gonna make it easier for me to slice. So let me put this in the microwave. Okay, while that one is cooking away, we're going to focus on our other squash. All right, so the next one we have here is a spaghetti squash. And I know a lot of you have heard about spaghetti squash and how it's a good substitute for real spaghetti, like with the spaghetti sauce. That's good. It's not my favorite way to fix it, but I found a really wonderful way to fix it. And once you taste it, you'll decide you don't want to top it with spaghetti sauce. This is an excellent way. All right, so we're gonna cut our spaghetti squash in half. And this one is a little finicky as well. I know the last thing you want to do is like slice a finger off. There we go. Okay. Takes a little manpower there, or woman power. Okay, whew. That was a little sweat there. All right, so you can see we've got our spaghetti squash. Nothing really fabulous, but you can see we've got the seeds inside. So we're going to scrape those out. So I'm gonna just scrape them out over here. And you can see when I'm scraping, it looks kind of stringy on the inside, which is what it's going to look like when it is cooked. Has that nice stringy consistency. I'm gonna make sure we get those seeds out. Here we go. That looks nice and clean. All right, we're gonna take the next side. Now I've got my oven preheated to about 425. I like it nice and hot for these. And then I've got a pan set up, aluminum foil with some ham on it, or some cooking spray. Okay, now at this point it is ready to prepare. So I have them scooped out, the seeds are removed, and I'm just going to take a little bit of my olive oil here and drizzle it on the inside. Right around the edge. The same on the other one. Okay. And then I'm going to take my salt here. I like my sea salt, coarse sea salt. And my freshly cracked black pepper. All right, next we're gonna take these and I'm gonna put them on my baking sheet. Now I'm gonna put them cut side down, like that. And then we're gonna put these in the oven and they're gonna take probably about 25 minutes at least. You wanna be able to poke them with a fork. Put them in the oven for about 25 minutes. All right, so that goes in there. All right, so next we have our butternut squash. So butternut squash, this is pretty easy. We see this a lot. Soups, we have butternut squash soup. It's really similar to a sweet potato in the fact that you can interchange it like a sweet potato. So you can mash it or you can roast it. So I'm just really gonna show you how to cut it up today because it's really a pain to cut up. So once you know the tricks and technique, then you'll get it down. All right, so I'm gonna cut the top off. You see it's got that really nice yellow orange flavored color to it. And next I'm gonna slice the bottom. And then I'm gonna slice it right about the center here. You can see we've got that bend right there. All right, so there's my two. And then with this, you can take either a knife or you can take a vegetable peeler and then just peel it. You wanna make sure you get all that skin off because it is tough. Now, if you decide you're gonna mash it, you could steam this and then mash it like you would sweet potatoes with brown sugar and butter and some seasonings, you know, cinnamon, nutmeg. Or you can make it savory and you can roast it and toss it with a little bit of olive oil and some salt and pepper. All right, so check my acorn squash. Oh yeah, it's nice. We're gonna let that cool off for a second. Okay, so I've got my butternut squash here, it's peeled. So what I'm gonna do is just slice it and then from there I can cube it. Now I would never recommend getting frozen butternut squash just for the fact that it's usually not peeled as well, and why spend money on something like that that's packaged when you can do it yourself and it's really not very complicated at all. It's pretty easy. All right, so there is our butternut squash. Now for this one right here, you can see we have some seeds. So if we were to cut it in half, we have some seeds there. So what we would do is just scrape them out like we did with our other. And then use that. We would peel the outside, peel the skin off, and then we would just cube the inside of it. So that's a nice way of using our butternut squash. All right, so we're gonna go on to our acorn squash. Let me take this off. Again, that's a really nice seasonal vegetable. It's really great roasted. I like to substitute it instead of sweet potatoes or add them with sweet potatoes as well. Has a nice flavor. All right, let's grab our acorn squash. Oh yeah, that sucker's nice and hot. Okay, so you can see it is much softer now. And we can cut right through it now. first time I tried to cook an acorn squash, I probably spent more time wrestling with it than I did cooking it, because it was just so hard. All right, so then what we're going to do is we're going to core this just like the others. You might want to let it cool down so you don't burn your hands like I am. And you can eat the skin if you'd like. It's much easier to leave the skin on and then slice it, just because of the way it's shaped. It's very hard to peel. All right. And this has a very mild taste to it as well. So you can dress this up, you can make it sweet or savory. And I'm going to show you how to make it sweet. This would be a good side dish for some chicken. If you're looking for something different for Thanksgiving, this would be perfect as well. All right, so I have my baking dish right here, and I've got 2 apples. And what I'm going to do is slice this up and alternate the acorn squash with some apple slices. Right. Cut that end off. Cut this end off as well. And really, that microwave really does save a lot of time. It makes it so much easier. You want some nice thick slices here. You don't want them too thin. Okay, let's take this piece and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to cut the end off. And the other end. All right, so there is our squash. Now I'm going to take my apple, squash it, and I'm going to leave the skin on my apple. I like to eat my apples like that. Now, a nice way of slicing the apples that really makes it a little bit easier, instead of worrying about the core, is just cutting around the core. And then I'm not having to fuss with it. You know, because there's nothing worse than cutting an apple and then having the seeds that you have to work around. You could use a Granny Smith apple if you wanted to. I think this one is a Honeycrisp apple. That one works just as well. Depends on how you like your fruit. If you like it a little bit on the tart side, then a Granny Smith. A little bit sweeter, then you could go with your Fuji or your Red Delicious, which is really sweet. The only problem with the Red Delicious, it turns to mush, so you want to be careful about that. All right, so I'm just going to place my acorn squash in here. Nice and hot. And then I'm just going to place some apples in this. All right, next I want to just add a little sweetener to it. So I have some maple syrup, some real maple syrup, and I'm just going to top this, run it right over the top here. I don't want it too sweet. Here we go. And then we can sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon and nutmeg over the top. Okay. So here's a little nutmeg. All right, so I'm going to cover this. You can dot it with some butter if you like. You could even put a little bit of apple juice in there if you wanted to, just to give it a little moisture. But I'm going to cover it and then bake it probably for about 15 minutes at 425. So stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to check on our spaghetti squash and I'll show you how to make a nice savory topping for it. All right, welcome back. So we've got our squash out of the oven, our spaghetti squash, and you can see it's nice and tender. We can press down on it with a fork. And so we're just going to leave that there for a minute. Now, in order to make this nice and savory, what we're going to do is we're going to toast some breadcrumbs, and then we're going to saute our squash. So I'm going to take some ghee. Now you can use butter, but I happen to have this available. And I'm going to put this in some of the pan. All right, now remember our panko crust that we used for our fish sticks, fish and chips? So we're going to use the same thing. Now, in order to take this up a notch, I like to toast these in some butter. And it's just going to make it nice and golden brown and add a little flavor to them. So we're going to let that toast for a minute. We want this nice and golden brown. So it's going to add some flavor to this. All right, so while that's cooking, I'm going to take some fresh chopped herbs, finely chopped. They're oregano and basil, and I'm just going to add these in here as well. If you have dried, that's fine too. All right, if you can see, it's starting to brown along the edges here. This is what we're looking for. So you can see we've got some browning going on. So we're going to give it just another minute or two. We don't want to burn these, so you want to make sure you constantly stir them, otherwise they're going to burn. And that's not going to be any good. All right, so turning that off. So nice. Turn it off just a little early because that residual heat will continue cooking these. And we don't want them to get to the point of no return in which they're burned. So like burnt toast. All right. Okay. See, so we have that nice brown color there. And I love my spatula. This is heat resistant, so it allows me to work on the stove cooking, and I don't have to worry about it melting or anything. So these are a great investment. All right, so we're gonna leave that there for a minute. Now in this pan, I'm going to saute my spaghetti squash. So I've got my pan on, and then I'm gonna add a little bit more ghee. And again, you can use butter. I like the flavor of the butter and the ghee better than olive oil, just because it has a little bit more, I guess, flavor to it. And ghee is, it's butter that's been melted down and separated, so you don't have the milk solids in here. And it is shelf stable, so you don't have to refrigerate it, which is really nice. So let's go to the side. All right, so next we're taking our squash here. Now look at that, we've got that beautiful color there in our squash. See how it's nice and caramelized around the edges there? And look at how easy it flakes. That's exactly what we're looking for. Let's see. So we have that beautiful flaking there. Grab that with my tongs because it is very hot. And I find when you turn it over like that, not only does it caramelize the edges and brown it, but it also allows the moisture to drain out of that squash, so you don't have a soggy squash. Alright, so now we're just going to saute our squash. And I'm going to put a little bit of nutmeg in it. This adds a nice little flavor to it. Not much, just enough. There we go. It's going to give it a nice flavor. All right, good. All right, so now we're going to plate it. So I've got my spaghetti squash here. And this is only half of the squash, so this is not a whole squash. So that's going on the side. And next we're taking some of our breadcrumbs here. Sprinkling of that. Then we're going to finish it off with a little bit of freshly grated Parmesan cheese. All right, and there is your spaghetti squash. And you will never want to eat it with spaghetti sauce again after having that. Now, let's get to the acorn squash. All right, so this is our acorn squash right here, and we've cooked it with some apples. It's a very simple dish. You don't need a whole lot to it. You could add some brown sugar if you wanted to, but we did some maple syrup. We really want the flavor of the acorn squash and the apples to come through. We don't want all that sweetness, because when you put too much sugar on it, you kind of lose the flavor of your vegetable. So This is your acorn squash, your spaghetti squash, and then the butternut squash, which we talked about. You could use it in as a substitute for sweet potatoes. You can roast it, you can steam it and then mash it and sweeten it like sweet potatoes, like you would for a souffle. You can combine both of them to kind of stretch a sweet potato. So it's really a versatile squash. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this. And in the upcoming weeks, you're going to see a slight change in the menu items. So I'll be focusing on Whole30 cooking. It's a new program I'll be starting, and some of those recipes will reflect the Whole30 lifestyle, but I will give you, I guess, substitutes or additions that you can make to it that would incorporate those who don't want to follow that diet. Anyway, hope you're doing well, and I hope to see you all soon. Thanks for eating with me today. Ciao.